Hey, this is Cam with Blacktail Studio, and this week I have the very last video that was shot in my old shop, and coincidentally, it is actually for my new house. Stay tuned. Depending on how much you actually watch my videos, this slab might look familiar to you. It was a kind of an oversized slab that I had to buy to make that tiny little left piece for this desk I did a couple of videos back. So at the end of cutting off that small little sliver, I was left with a slab that was over 8 feet long and I think about 16 inches wide, which was actually going to be perfect for this console table because the new house we got is a lot bigger than our old house. And we can't afford regular furniture to go in the whole thing, especially 8-foot long tables. So my wife asked if we could make a console table out of this leftover piece of wood. And it's not the most remarkable piece of wood, but it's pretty cool. And I think it'll fill up a pretty large area in the new house pretty nicely. This slab was pretty close to being what's called a jacket cut, which means it was almost on the outside of the log, which is why we have these big recessed areas of natural live edge. And they really aren't something you normally look for when you're making a table like this. But since I had the slab, it was already free. I really wanted to lean into it because I thought they were kind of cool and we'll embrace that kind of jacket cut aspect to it. If you're new to my videos, one thing you'll see me do a lot is make mistakes. And normally I make several shallow passes. And this one time I thought I could make one single pass and save some time. And here's what happened. That Festool track saw got stuck in this piece of walnut. So it became quite the mess. I can't remember how long it took me to fish this thing out of there because you're trying not to bend the blade. You don't want to hurt the machine. So you got to try to kind of get some wedges in there. And it was just my mistake. It's not a super powerful saw. It's a super accurate saw, just not made for making deep 2-inch cuts like that. So I had to jockey with this for quite a while, bent it probably a little bit more than I should have, eventually got it out. So I like to include that in my videos. You guys may make fun of me, and you're probably right to do so in this case, because I knew better. I should have just made a few 1/2-inch cuts instead of trying to go all at one time. The sanders that I use are really expensive, and I think they're worth it, but most people aren't going to be able to justify the cost of one of these, let alone 3 of them or more like some people have. So the question I get a lot is, if you can only afford one of these sanders, which one would you get? And it actually wouldn't be the Rotex. You might think it would be the Rotex because it has kind of a regular mild mode and then that heavy-duty Rotex mode that removes a ton of material. I don't think it's worth it. Their fine sanding mode really isn't that good of a pattern, so I would recommend getting this Festool ETS EC150. Not a very catchy name, but it is a far superior sander when it comes to delivering a really nice finish. And if you put 100 grit and a firm pad on it, it doesn't sand quite as fast as the Festool, but it is really, really good. So I'll include a link to all the sanders below, but the one that I would get is that ETS EC150. Speaking of tools you do not need a trim router. If I was only going to have one router, it definitely wouldn't be a trim router. It is handy for some really light duty tasks like this, but I did an article a little while back in my blog about kind of the best tools for the money, and I think the one that I liked was the Bosch plunge router with the fixed base. It's really versatile, and I would probably rather have that over my Festool if I could only have one router. If you follow along closely, you know that I've been using a lot of Rubio Monaco lately, and I always like to emphasize that I am not sponsored by them. I've even had some people on Instagram that are tagging me and Rubio saying that I should be sponsored, and they very politely say that they do not offer sponsorships at this time. So it is just a finish that I really like. I'm always exploring new finishes, and I am prepping this the same way as I do my wood and epoxy tables that I do the Rubio finish. This is their Rubio Raw Wood Cleaner. I don't know that it's necessary. I know guys that use Rubio without doing the raw wood cleaner. They kind of got me on their scare tactics of saying you could have problems if you use mineral spirits. So I went ahead and used their raw wood cleaner and then am applying this Rubio Pure 2C right here. Rubio is generally a very matte finish, and I kind of like a more satin finish, and so I found a way to do 2 coats of Rubio without any of the ill effects that they say you can have with applying 2 coats of Rubio. So if you want kind of an in-depth dive to that, I'll include a link to my blog that also has a link to a video with a step-by-step process on how to apply 2 coats. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to kind of rush through it so I don't have to kind of show you what you've already seen if you've already watched that video. I take instructions from clients all day long, every day, so I feel like when I'm making something for myself, I am maybe not the most open to suggestions. So this time I decided to allow my wife to design the base, and she generally has a fair amount of input, but I'll be honest, I do veto her a lot when it comes to making these decisions. So she came up with a really cool design that, I'll be honest, is not the most stable, but it is pretty cool looking in the end, and we came up with a pretty good solution to make it a little bit more stable. One of my goals for this table was to make everything out of wood that I already had. I didn't want to spend any money. Like I mentioned, we're buying a house or we just bought a house. So we're trying to kind of control our finances during this, but we're also trying to fill it with a bunch of pretty nice furniture. So all of these were essentially offcuts. And I don't want to market this like a table I built for free because most everybody out there is not going to have these kind of offcuts. But this is why I save a ton of these scraps from these big slabs, because you'll see in the end, this is actually some really, really nice wood that I used on the legs and ended up making a pretty cool, pretty unique base for really no cost to me. You'll see in a little bit that I use some really cool wood that had some crazy figuring and really great grain that goes every which direction. And I can't wait because the joinery police is going to give me a stern lesson in the comments on saying you should only use straight grain, quarter sawn, plain old bland wood when you're making legs. And while that is probably best as far as joinery goes, it just doesn't look that cool. And you know what? This is not a table that I'm planning to hand down to my grandchildren. It's kind of a cool table that I guarantee will last many, many, many years. But yes, this is not probably the really authentic way to make a table that will last for 2 centuries. After I get everything together in a dry fit process so I know it will glue together nicely, I take it all back apart, and then I sand everything to 120 grit. And this just saves me a lot of sanding that I would have to do while the table is assembled. It's a lot harder to sand into the corners, especially that lower grit. You don't want to kind of dish into the piece that it's glued to. So sand everything up to 120 grit. And then a good trick to do if you don't do this is you should use the painter's tape anytime you're gluing something up. And this is just an old woodworker's trick. This is definitely not something I invented, but man, it can save you a ton of time and frustration of trying to get the glue out of the cracks. There is not a lot to it. I just use a good quality painter's tape and a nice sharp razor blade and cut right along the seams. You'll see here in a second that I also use a little Japanese marking knife, but the razor blade is best because it really is just that much sharper. And then I get my pieces kind of dry fit again together, so I know when I make my cuts, it's going to be exactly where that glue line is going to be. So I use just my finest little 1/8" Japanese marking knife, come through, make all of my cuts, making sure not to scar the wood, and it's pretty easy. Just make a couple nice light passes, take everything back apart, and then just kind of gently peel apart those cuts you made. A couple videos ago, I mentioned that I had a discussion with a local woodworking company that's been in business for about 40 years, and they told me that they do not recommend using Titebond 3 with walnut. And that was news to me because I'd been only using Titebond 3 for a while, and I've never had a problem with it. But they do a lot more gluing than I do. So I have switched over to Titebond Original. I got a fair amount of comments from people. I had a handful of people that said, hey, I've never had a problem with it. I don't know what they're saying. But I did have quite a few experienced woodworkers that say, yeah, we've been in business a long time and we do not use Titebond 2 or 3. And some people said they use 2, but not 3. So I do recommend using the Titebond Original, especially with walnut now. When you're removing the tape from your corners, you want to wait about 30 minutes so it's just starting to set up, and then peel it off. And that'll make it easy to get those tiny little bits just like that the tape didn't catch. If you go too soon, it'll leave more of that. And if you wait too long, then it can make the tape really hard to remove and kind of bond to the wood itself. Depending on how closely you're paying attention, you might have been wondering how I was going to attach this kind of funky looking base to the flat slab bottom. And I did a similar mounting system on a table a couple of years ago, so I'm kind of mimicking that one. And it's just some kind of shallow C-channel that I had laying around from a couple of years ago. Marked a couple holes, made a couple cuts, and then I'm going to take it over to the drill press and kind of embarrass myself with my metalworking skills. These drill bits are awesome. My steel guy turned me onto them. I think they're available on Amazon. I'll have links to these and everything else in the video description. But here is how good of a metal worker I am. Can't even drill a simple hole. But eventually I got a few holes drilled, and you might be seeing how this is going to go together already. And if not, it'll make sense here pretty quick. Essentially, all that I am doing is I'm drilling 4 holes in each of these, and I will mark a couple spots for threaded inserts, and these are just the same threaded inserts that I use in all my tables. And then I will take my router and kind of recess these into the underside of the table, allowing myself to put a couple bolts in the bottom and keeping everything totally hidden. And again, if it doesn't make sense yet, will pretty soon, I promise. If you haven't watched my videos before, first off, welcome. I really appreciate you watching. And one thing you should know is that I am super good to responding at essentially every single question and comment in there. And if you stick around to the end of the video, you'll really see what I mean, because I respond to even the trolls, because I feel like they need attention more than anybody. So at the end of this, if you watched it all and you still don't understand why I did it this way, or if there's a better way, or maybe you have a suggestion for me of kind of a simpler, cleaner way that you would have done it, I would love to hear it. I will read it and I will respond to it. The only thing I ask is that if you get something from this video, if you enjoy watching it, just hit that little subscribe button, because that's what enables me to keep making videos just like this one. This acrylic plastic is a little bit more of a pain to work with. It doesn't cut super well, but it does make an awesome jig. It sticks really well to that double-sided tape. The tape comes off it really easily, and the router slides along top very, very easily. So I go get these little scrap pieces from the excess bin at Tap Plastics, and they make an awesome jig. All right, a quick test fit. I know it's going to work, and now I can sand the legs just like the top up to that 180 grit. And I did the same process. I did the same water pop, same router 1/8 edge profile, and this was really nice to actually have the trim router here, and you can see I didn't attach the steel to it just yet to enable me to get all the way up. The one problem was I had to use kind of a little hand file, hand rasp to get in the corners right here. So the 1/8 inch trim router was an awesome tool to have for getting in these tight spaces, but still not the only tool. You always need something else. One of my favorite things about having a page that has a pretty good following now is that I have a lot of increased brain power, because there's a ton more of you than there is of me. So I want to hear what you guys want me to make. What do you guys actually want to see? Do you want to see more high-end projects? Do you want to see crazy expensive tables that I make for clients? Or would you like to see more realistic stuff? Or maybe just stuff that you might be able to do yourself, more experiments with that burnt wood and epoxy, or just something totally different altogether. So let me know in the comments what you think, what you want to see, because like I said, there's a lot more of you than there is of me, so we can come up with a lot more cool ideas of things to make in the future, because like I said, I'm going to see all those comments, I'm going to read all of them, and they're probably all not going to be winners, let's be honest, but I bet there's a couple of you out there that have a really cool idea for a project coming up. All right, here is the first look at how this Rubio looks on this black walnut. You can see some really pretty color, some really nice grain, some really nice figuring. Yes, it is not plain, straight grain, quarter sawn walnut that is probably ideal, but I am very confident that it's going to hold up, and feel free to hit me up in a year or 5 years and ask me how it's holding up. All right, for the record, I'm going to say do not do this in your house. This is not a substitution for anchoring something to a wall. We don't have any kids. I'm not that worried about this table falling over. I just want it to be a little bit more secure if somebody set something heavy on one end. So I just added a little bit of painter's tape to the floor and to the table, added a little bit of hot glue, and then I just press it on there firmly. And that painter's tape is going to allow this to be removed easily instead of just putting hot glue directly on the wood. That's the only reason for the painter's tape. And it does make it a lot more secure, but not a substitution for anchoring something to a wall. Do not do this if you're worried about kids. This will topple. This will hurt your child. After getting it centered on my recesses there, I just added a few furniture bolts, and it was super snug. Also, I didn't add any finish yet in the underside, and I didn't realize that until this point. I meant to add some finish. It's not going to hurt anything, but I don't like leaving raw wood unfinished like that. So I will go back and add a little bit of finish after this. What are you doing, little buddy? Oh, there you go. Good buddy. That seems to be the new normal these days, is kids and pets getting in the way when you're trying to work, but I actually really like it when he works alongside of me, and I think I'm going to use some photos that I took of him laying there next to the table in this cover photo, and I guess you'll know by the time you watch this if there was a dog on the cover photo, because he just decided to lay down and join the photo shoot. But here is the overall look of the table, how it's attached, how that grain looks, how that color turned out, how that finish looks. All in all, I want to hear what you guys think of this design. It is not the most stable. I want to be very upfront about that. You do need to kind of baby it, or better yet, attach it to a wall. But it is pretty cool looking, kind of a cantilever design, kind of a Frank Lloyd Wright look. I like the way the live edge looked. Let me know what you guys think if you would have left those kind of jacket cut corners on there. I like how the sapwood, that lighter wood, looks on the edges. The grain actually turned out a lot nicer than I thought. It was nicer than that little offcut that I used on the other tables. So overall, for a free table, I am pretty happy with it. All right, if you watch my videos, you know that every week I like to give a little bit of credit to the people that make it all the way to the end of the video. And whenever possible, I like to confuse the people that don't make it all the way to the end of the video. So start your question or comment with my dog's name, Riggs, R-I-G-G-S. And that way I will know you made it all the way to the end of the video, and I promise I will answer all of your questions or comments first. And as an added bonus, we'll confuse everybody by all the random comments that start with Riggs. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe for more videos just like this one. Have a great week.